Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is a round 4 game from the second annual Gashimov Memorial 2015. We have on the white end Wesley paired up with Rauf Mamedov. Wesley is a co-leader at this point in the tournament, along with Magnus Carlsen, both Wesley and Magnus having 2.5 points. Let's see how this one plays out. Wesley opening up in this game with e4, Rauf replying with the Sicilian. We see an open Sicilian, d4 on board. Black goes with a kingside fianchetto. Meanwhile, white sets up a Maróczy bind, making life difficult for d5. Let's see how black addresses this space disadvantage. Both sides getting some development in here. f3 to secure that bishop post on e3. Bishop e2, knight h5, and okay, what's this knight up to? Well, for one, the bishop now gets to see d4 directly, and should white go on with an immediate castles, there is knight f4 right away. Bishop takes knight, knight takes knight. If knight takes knight, there's the in-between shot with check, and only then the recapture. So white rules this out altogether. g3 it is. There will be no knight f4. There is a drawback connected with g3. It's that h3 is now a hole, and a square that black, well, it's quite tempting, at least on my part when I'm reviewing for a video such as this. I'm thinking to myself, why not? Why not develop and be a pest? Why not develop and prevent your opponent from getting on with their development? Seems quite tempting, but there's a serious drawback connected with that. On bishop h3, there would follow knight takes knight, and look out, g4 hits the knight, and now there's no returning with the bishop. Knight f6 is the only safe square for him. And now king f2, king g3, and soon the bishop will be watching this game from the sidelines. He's trapped. Black has to be very careful and not jump into that h3 square, at least right away. In the game, we had knight takes knight, bishop takes. Now is a moment where the bishop can make use of the h3 square without fear of this g4 move. If this did happen, bishop h3, g4, this knight doesn't have only one square. Knight f4 is now available. In that previous case, the bishop was still on e3 to watch out for the knight f4 move. What white would do if bishop h3 was played in this case, simply capture, develop a piece with check, and this is where the king will reside, on the queen side. We didn't have that. We did not have bishop h3, but instead bishop e6, exerting some queenside pressure. f4, the knight now returns towards the center. Castles, rook c8, b3 to defend, and now about 15 minutes was spent on this next one, move 14 for Team Black. Queen a5. This is, I guess we could identify this as an inaccuracy, maybe something a bit beyond that. The objective best move in this case here, in this position, is to actually jump into that h3 square at this moment here. Hitting the rook on rook to f2. There are different ideas in mind from this position. There's ideas like knight to g4, a6, h5, playing against these light squares here, trying to make use of that weakness, g3. A6 is prepping b5. Let me just play out a couple moves here. Suppose after bishop h3, rook to f2, we have this a6 move, and what would be something that's a bit logical? Let's say rook c1. There can follow h5. There's ideas of also e5, breaking open the position, and also b5. Some interesting options are present, and this bishop is a pretty menacing piece here. These moves that I'm highlighting here, the b5 move in particular, it may turn out that white ends up losing a pawn, but it seems to me, at least, that there would be some form of compensation for that material loss. The compensation being that the white king is weakened, far more weakened than his counterpart here on g8. This bishop is controlling some squares around the white king. b5 would open the position, so too would e5. h5 is more of a securing a knight jump into that g4 square. This is a direction black could have gone in, maybe should have gone in, and maybe was considering, but at the end of the day, Black did not play this. Bishop h3 did not occur. Instead, it was queen a5, and from here, it's White who really starts to push Black around, in fact, right away with f5. It seems at first glance that the queen is there, Black is there enough to prevent this f5 advance. For example, if takes, there's enough defense, but this queen can be deflected from the bishop's defense, and White is going to be winning. So f5 is played. Black recognizes you can't take twice on this square. And this is a very important pawn to keep around for defense of the king. So Black just reacts to the threat right away, not making a capture first, keeping this structure as is. Bishop d7, and now a3. White is now slowly grabbing more and more space, looking for now b4, rocking the queen back. As a reply, we have e6. Quite a bit of time, as we could see here, was spent on this move here. 77 minutes going into this move here, and about 34 minutes spent on e6, and now it's big trouble for Team Black already. Surprising, but it is the case. A better move may have been a6, looking for ideas with b5, bishop to c6, exerting some pressure on the e4 pawn. Neither of those moves were played, or maybe even e5, very committal move, clearly weakening that d5 square, but this turns out to be a move that White is able to take advantage of very nicely. First, starting with b4, queen drops back, simply capturing, and then playing e5. The result of this pawn advance is that Black is now saddled with an isolated e-pawn, but it doesn't stop there. Without the d-pawn on board, we now have a queenside majority that White puts into action right away. So this is a weakness here, the isolated pawn, and this is a very healthy queenside majority for the White side. As a follow-up, bishop c6, b5, another forward move, grabbing some space, and doing so with tempo. Knight to e4 is the follow-up. The queens are exchanged, a pair of rooks are exchanged, and the dark square bishops are gone, and now a very nice move, rook to c1, getting the last piece involved. Knight takes knight, rook takes, and the bishop is now having to react. A very simplified ending, a better pawn structure for White, and these guys get rolling. This was a very clean game here played on the White side. Once he had this advantage, once this isolated pawn was on board for Black, it became very, very difficult. It's been simplified quite a bit with those last several moves. It's very difficult to suggest something for Black, getting the king towards the center, both sides, and slowly White is able to create a pass pawn on the queen side. Whereas this pawn here, he is passed, but it's very difficult to get him rolling. White has pressure on b7 in this position, rook c7. White also has the more active rook. It may appear that Black has the more active king, but he's soon going to be kicked away from the center. We have king d3. This is a step in the direction of one day kicking the king away from the center. We're going to see that. After g5, king c4, the king will be kicked. Soon we're going to have a5 and b5, and a pass pawn will be on board. h5 it is. What else is there for Black at this stage? It's difficult to suggest something. Let's say, I don't even know. Instead of g5, if b6 is played, we could have captures. Rook takes, king takes, pawn takes, king b4, a5 is on board soon enough, and we're still going to have a pass pawn. White is in the driver's seat in this situation as well. In the game we had g5, king c4, a5. You don't have to react to this threat here. Instead it is b6, ignoring the threat. Takes, rook there. Still ignoring the threat, getting on with a check, inconveniencing the king, and then playing c6, ignoring this threat once more. This is the more forcing move. White is dictating play, has been dictating play for several moves now. Clearly the side with the initiative. After pawn takes, bishop takes, what more is there? If you're not taking the pawn here, on the c6 square. After c6, what do? Rook to d6, there's c takes b. Pawn takes, bishop takes, the bishops are gone, b7, and just like that, black is throwing in the towel. There's nothing to do. What do you do in this position? Rook to b8, rook to b3, the king approaches, but the white king is faster. On the next move here, we're going to have a check, king c7, the rook is kicked away, the pawn pushes through. Very, very clean game on the white side. Once it got to this point right here, let's say, very important point is not making this bishop to h3 move. I believe this was the start of a very difficult road ahead for black, playing queen to a5 here instead of bishop to h3. This would have been the better move, but when queen a5 was on board, very natural move, right, to just develop, rake this 5th rank, but black starts to get pushed around. White is grabbing some space in the meantime. Maybe this is the last try, something other than e6, as mentioned earlier, bishop c6, maybe at this point here. I believe at some point when I was reviewing for this game, the computer was pointing out this lashing out b5 move right away without an a6 prep. a6 might also be a move here first as well, but when e6 was on board, white is just dictating play, giving great direction to the black side. It's either captures or direct threats. Not very many choices on the black side. As we're seeing here, b5, the bishop's hit, the queens are off, rooks are off, dark square bishops are off, the rook is active, and these guys get rolling. Meanwhile, he's a pass pawn, but he's insignificant in this ending here. White is the better side and a very, very clean win. In fact, with this win, Wesley is now pushed up to sole leader of the tournament with 3.5 points going into round 5. So we'll see how things play out from here. So that's all for this video. As always, I hope you got something out of it. And as usual, feel free to leave any comments in the comment section below. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.